So Merrick Garland testified last week. Here's the timeline of events. September 29th, I believe it was, the National School Board Association wrote a letter that we now know was written in conjunction with people in the White House staff. So working with people in the White House, they wrote a letter suggesting that people angry at school boards, parents angry at school boards, were domestic terrorists and that we needed to use things like the Patriot Act to go after them. 4 days later, Merrick Garland wrote a memo saying that that's basically exactly what was going to happen. That he was appalled by the rash of violence against and intimidation against school board members, and that he was going to have the FBI work in conjunction with school boards and local law enforcement to deal with that.
That in recent months, there's been a disturbing spike in harassment.
So, on October 21st, Merrick Garland was in front of the House committee. And Jim Jordan asked him, given that he wrote this memo saying that the FBI was going to do the wishes of the National School Board Association, and now, because remember, the National School Board Association is working with the White House, and they say, we want to treat these parents like domestic terrorists. We want the FBI mobilized. And then, after the weekend, Merrick Garland comes out and is like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. Because a rash of violence. Okay, the first question that I would have to Merrick Garland is, where do you see evidence of this increased violence? Where do you see evidence of it? Did you do an independent analysis at the DOJ? Did the FBI compile statistics? Where did you get this information? Because I said this well before Merrick Garland testified. I said, where are these reports? I've seen a handful of reports of school board meetings getting antsy, people getting arrested. I've seen a handful of reports of them shutting down early, but I haven't seen like terroristic threats being issued at school. And you would think that given the narrative that's out there all against people that are complaining against critical race theory, that the national media would be jumping on these stories. So where were they? That was my question. I assume Merrick Garland would say something like, well, the FBI has been working for over 2 months and they've compiled a database of 73 incidences, something like that. This was his response. Jim Jordan asked Merrick Garland, where is the data, given your sentence, given the reason for this memo is because of these rash of attacks and violence and intimidation and harassment and school board members? Where is your evidence for that? And keep in mind, if you watch further on this, what Merrick Garland says is, we're not talking about just people yelling at school boards. We're talking about actual violence. That's where the FBI would get involved. So where's the evidence, Jim Jordan asked. Let's see what Merrick Garland said on October 21st when he testified in front of the House, where he got his evidence from. Ready?
First sentence of your memo, very first sentence, you said, in recent months, there's been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, threats of violence.
Yes.
When did you first review the data showing this so-called disturbing uptick?
So I read the letter, and we have been seeing over time threats.
Whoa. I didn't ask you. So you read the letter. That's your source?
So let me be clear. This is not a prosecution or an investigation.
Is there some study, some effort, some investigation someone did that said there's been a disturbing uptick, or you just take the words of the National School Board Association?
Well, the National School Board Association, which represents thousands of school boards and school board members, says that there are these kind of threats. When we read in the newspapers reports of threats of violence, when that is in the context of threats of violence.
The source for this, for the very first line in your memo.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Was the School Board Association letter.
Expired, Mr. Deutsch.
There you have it, straight from the horse's mouth. As would be repeated today by Merrick Garland, his source was the National School Board Association letter and newspaper articles. We have weaponized the FBI to go after parents based on National School Board Association letter and newspaper articles, not based on data that the FBI has compiled. Now, Merrick Garland can't go back now and say, oh, we've done further research. Too late. You don't weaponize the FBI based on a hunch because you read some newspaper articles and the National School Board Association said that. It doesn't matter if that data exists or not. Merrick Garland is acknowledging right there. He wasn't looking at any data. He was looking at newspaper articles and the National School Board Association. Now, under further questioning from a different congressperson, he was asked specifically about the case of Scott Smith. In the National School Board Association letter, which we went through much of it, I showed you that they only cited about 20 cases. Most of those cases had nothing to do with violence. It would say something like this. There have been incidences of harassment in California, Virginia, and Maryland at school board. And then you would click on the links, and it would say something like this. In California, a school board meeting yesterday shut down early as parents were angry about critical race theory. and the school board shut it down early. Okay. That's why we're weaponizing the FBI? Parents at a school in Maryland were upset about mask policies. And? That's not terrorism. What does that have to do with the FBI getting involved? And I said, someone needs to ask Merrick Garland, because now we know what happened. The National School Board Association, thank you so much, Kevin I, rescinded that letter and apologized. Said it was outrageous. We're seeing state after state after state now withdrawing from the National School Board Association. Ohio did it. I think Iowa did it. Pennsylvania was suggesting doing it. I don't know the specific state. I know Ohio was one of them. But we're seeing states saying we don't want any part of this. People outraged. States actually withdrawing from the National School Board Association. The National School Board Association is like, our bad. We shouldn't have likened parents to terrorists. So the question is, okay, since Merrick Garland said that his reasoning for this was that letter, and they've rescinded the letter, does that mean Merrick Garland says, I apologize and I'm rescinding the order to have the FBI work to investigate these parents? So he was asked that today, and Merrick Garland says, no, I'm not going to rescind the letter. No, you heard him right there. He didn't look at any data compiled by the FBI. He just read the National School Board Association and some newspaper articles. Doesn't say which ones. Now again, almost every case, Ted Cruz is going to say 15 out of the 20 that's cited by the National School Board Association letter have nothing to do with violence whatsoever. Just angry parents yelling at a school board meeting. No threats, no violence. There were only 2 cases listed there that suggested people getting arrested in the National School Board Association letter. One was someone in Illinois. The other was in Loudoun County. A gentleman by the name of Scott Smith. Cited in the National School Board Association. Likened to a terrorist that we would need the Patriot Act to deal with. He was arrested. Now, if I'm the Attorney General, and I'm directing the FBI to go after parents, treating them like terrorists, and I'm using this letter as an excuse, I'd at least read the footnotes and click on the fucking links to see what the examples they're saying is. That's what I would do, especially the ones that resulted in arrests. But when Merrick Garland was asked back on the 21st, do you know about this Loudoun County case? He says, no, I don't know about it. I don't know. Sounds like a local issue. So again, just so you know, if your daughter is raped in a bathroom and the school board covers it up, that's a local issue. The FBI doesn't get involved. But if you go to the school board and complain about it, now the FBI gets involved. You see? You see how that works? You see? So he didn't know that was a local issue. So he didn't even read the cases that the National School Board Association said. He just took them at face value. Oh, I assume that they know what's up. Okay, well, they've rescinded the letter, sir. So now what? Now, this is a little long, but it's worth looking at Ted Cruz's 9-minute grilling of Merrick Garland. I'll stop it if I feel necessary. So Ted Cruz rightfully is not amused by this. Let's see how this line of questions. This is one of the worst I've ever seen. This is as bad as I've seen someone look since Bob Mueller was forced to testify. That's how bad Merrick Garland looks. You ready?
Obama, the Department of Justice was politicized and weaponized. When you came before this committee in your confirmation hearing, you promised things would be different. I asked you specifically, quote, will you commit to this committee that under your leadership, the Department of Justice will not target the political opponents of this administration? Here was your answer, quote, absolutely. It's totally inappropriate for the department to target any individual because of their politics or their position in a campaign. That was your promise just a few months ago. I'm sorry to say you have broken that promise. There is a difference between law and politics. And General Garland, you know the difference between law and politics. Law is based on facts. It is impartial. It is not used as a tool of political retribution. This memo was not law. This memo was politics. On Wednesday, September 29th, the National School Board Association wrote a letter to the president asking the president to use the Department of Justice to target parents that were upset at critical race theory, that were upset at mask mandates in schools, to target them as domestic terrorists. On the face of the letter was in repeated consultation with the White House, an explicit political consultation with the White House. That was on Wednesday, September 29th. 5 days later, on Monday, so right after the weekend, boom, you pop out a memo giving them exactly what they want. Now, by the way, I understand that. In politics, that happens all the time. An important special interest wants something. Sir, yes, sir. We're going to listen to them. Let me ask you something, General Garland. In the letter, which you told the House of Representatives was the basis for this abusive memo targeting parents, how many incidents are cited in that memo?
I have to look back through the memo. I can't count it.
You don't know. How many of them were violent?
Again, the general report.
How many of them were violent? Do you know?
I don't know.
You don't know. And there's a reason you don't know. Because you didn't care, and nobody in your office cared to find out. I did a quick count just sitting here. During this hearing, I counted 20 incidents.
Now, stop right here. This is an excellent point, and it's the point that I was making. The truth of the matter is, Merrick Garland never read what the incidents that were cited in the National School Board memo said. And it was obvious because he kept saying last time, oh, no, we're not just targeting people over yelling at school board meetings. Then what are you targeting them over? Because the evidence outlined in the National School Board Association memo didn't speak to a mass wave of school board members being chased home and terroristic threats and things like that. Almost every incident that they cited was just angry parents. It was evident, even when he brought up the Loudoun County case, when the one congressman, he said, I don't know about that case. How could you not? It was one of two cases outlined in the school board memo that you said was your reasoning for weaponizing the FBI that led to an arrest. One of only two cases that led to an arrest, and you couldn't read up on that case? So in other words, what Merrick Garland's admitting here is neither me or anyone in my staff bothered to actually read the data in the letter that we used as the precipice for starting this weaponization of the FBI against parents. We didn't bother to read it. Just like Cruz said, that makes sense in politics. Special interest group wants some? Sir, yes, sir. That's not what the Attorney General is supposed to be doing, but that's what it is. It's political. That's it. They're going after political opponents. And Merrick Garland, he can't say shit because he knows it. Go ahead, tell me the staffer, General Garland, that read this. Go ahead, tell me. He can't have his cake and eat it too. If he says, no, it's not about going after angry school board parents. It's about going after the violent ones. Cool, where did you see this evidence of the uptick of violence? Where did you see that warranted the FBI getting involved? Please show us. Jim Jordan asked him. He said the letter, okay, the National School Board Association letter that's been rescinded, that they were forced to apologize for, and newspaper articles. Which ones? Notice he's still, up to this point where he's being questioned by Ted Cruz, he hasn't cited one case. Not one case, not one article. He just said, I read newspaper articles. Are you comfortable with that? We'll get more to that in a minute when we get to Cory Booker's questioning.
Cited. Of the 20, 15 on their face are nonviolent. They involve things like insults. They involve a Nazi salute. That's one of the examples. My God, a parent did a Nazi salute at a school board because he thought the policies were oppressive. General Garland is doing a Nazi salute at an elected official. Is that protected by the First Amendment?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Now, brief moment of pause here. That point right there was brought up by people on Twitter. I forget who the blue checkmark, we'll look at it later, that said, now we see Ted Cruz is defending Nazi salutes. That's not what he's doing. First off, yes, you have the free speech to do a Nazi salute. That's not violence or terrorism. Second, if you say Ted Cruz is defending it, so's Merrick Garland, right? So surely you want him to resign. He's defending Nazis, right? C. Preem says Republicans are Nazis. That's interesting, right? We'll get to that. So you see the lefty on here saying Republicans are Nazis. So if Ted Cruz is defending it, so's Merrick Garland. He just said, sure, that's protected. Third, what Ted Cruz is saying and what this case was that someone was accusing the school board of being Nazis through their mask policies and made a Nazi gesture at them, not because the parent was a Nazi, but he was saying, you're being Nazis. That's now considered, accusing someone else of being a Nazi is now considered potential terrorism? Well, that's funny. Sheep Freeman here just called Republicans Nazis. So given that definition, the FBI should be mobilized against people that call Republicans Nazis, right? That's what Sheep Freeman just did. That's what thousands of Democrats and left-wingers do all the time. Constantly calling Republicans or Trump supporters Nazis. Over and over and over they do it. So we now weaponize the FBI, right, Sheep Freeman? You just called Republicans Nazis. That's the same thing that this guy did. He called the school board Nazis. So if that's terrorism that needs to be investigated by the FBI, then surely they need to come for you too, right, Sheep Freeman? Right? How am I going to take seriously people that lied and said Trump said Nazis were good people and called Trump, I think it was Ilhan Omar today that said Ted Cruz is defending Nazis. She called Trump a fascist all the time. So Ted Cruz saying an angry parent that thought that a school board was being fascist, making fun of them as a Nazi, that's protected. That's not terrorism that regards the FBI getting involved, right? Merrick Garland says, sure, yeah, you're absolutely right. Ilhan Omar's like, that's defending Nazis. Yet she personally called Trump a fascist all the time and spread lies that he said Nazis were good people, which he never did. So should the FBI be looking into Ilhan Omar? But thanks, Sheep Freeman. Thanks for proving the point by calling people Nazis. I know one of you would be good for it. So I just thought that was a brief aside. That's how the media, that's how so many people are trying to spin right now, the Democrats. Ted Cruz defending Nazis. No, Ted Cruz is defending people's rights to call people they see as tyrannical Nazis. Just like the left did to Donald Trump all the time.
"15 of the 20, on the face of it, are not violent. They're not threats of violence. They're parents who are unhappy. Yet, miraculously, when you write a memo, the opening line of your memo, in recent months, there has been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. You know what? You didn't look, and nobody on your staff looked. Did you even look up the 20 instances?
As I testified, the decision to send a memo is for an assessment.
Did you look up the 20 instances?
I did not read.
Did anyone on your staff look them up?
I don't know the answer, but it's not
but of course you don't.
So he wrote the memo. He said that the reason he wrote it was because the National School Board Association memo and news stories that he read. And he's now admitting he did not read the incidences in the National School Board Association letter, nor was he aware that anyone in his staff had done so. So he came to the decision. This isn't me that said it. It's not Ted Cruz that said it. I didn't say, I think the reason Merrick Garland did this was because of the National School Board Association memo. Now, I may have said that, but it's irrelevant to what I think. He told you himself. He told Jim Jordan. He said, the first line of your memo says there's an increase in violence and other things against these school boards. When did you first become aware of that? And he goes, well, I read the letter. And Jim Jordan's like, wait. So there wasn't a study or anything? You just read this letter? And he's like, well, in newspaper articles. That's out of his own mouth. He testified in front of Congress. At least half the reason that he crafted this memo, getting the FBI involved and going after parents, was because of this letter. And now he's admitting to you, well, I didn't even read it. I didn't read the incidences. This should outrage everyone, left or right. Wasn't it the left that was saying shit like Donald Trump's a fascist? He's going to weaponize his Department of Justice. He's going to weaponize his FBI. He's going to weaponize the National Guard to go after political opponents. Yet now, nary a peep. Nary a peep when we see the Biden administration doing exactly that. Let's continue.
In general, there's a reason. Look, you started your career as a law clerk to Justice Brennan. You've had many law clerks during the year, during your time as a judge. I was a clerk to Chief Justice Rehnquist. I'll tell you what, If I drafted an opinion for the Chief Justice and walked in and it said, there's a disturbing pattern of violence, well, Ted, how do you know that? Well, I got an amicus brief here who claims it. You would fire a law clerk who did that. You're the Attorney General of the United States. This was not a tweet you sent. This is a memo to the Federal Bureau of Investigations saying, go investigate parents as domestic terrorists.
That is not what the memo says.
Ted Cruz is absolutely right here, by the way. That would not cut the mustard in any... Where do you get proof from these? You're advocating some legal change, some involvement of the largest law enforcement agency in the world. You better have some damn good evidence that says that it's necessary. What's your evidence? I read some newspaper stories and I thumbed through a letter from the National School Board Association. I didn't even read the incidences they were talking about. That's pathetic. Now Merrick Garland's going to say, oh, no. What I recommended wasn't anything bad. Listen to what he says.
At all. It does not.
Is it what the letter says?
That is not what...
Is it what the letter says?
I don't care what the letter says.
You don't care. You said it was the basis of your memo. You testified under oath before the House of Representatives. The letter was the basis of your memo. Now you don't care about the letter?
The letter and public reports of violence and threats of violence. My memo says nothing about domestic terrorism, says nothing about parents committing any such things. My memo is an attempt to get an assessment of whether there is a problem out there that the federal government needs to resolve.
The letter on its face.
That's not what the letter does. The letter talks about having the FBI contact school boards around the country and work with local law enforcement to go after people that are using violence, harassment, intimidation against school board members. That's what the letter does. Now he's backing off. We just watched the testimony in front of Jim Jordan where he said the reason that I had for crafting this memo was the National School Board Association letter and newspaper articles that I read, news articles I saw. Now he's saying, oh, no. You shouldn't hold me to the language of the National School Board Association letter, which called these people domestic terrorists and advocating for the FBI to get involved. Why is the FBI getting involved if they didn't think that this was an example of domestic terrorism? Let's say that it's true. Let's say that you on the left are like, I find it disturbing that there are so many parents showing up yelling at school board members. Okay. Does that warrant the FBI getting involved? Why would the FBI get involved? Are local police so overwhelmed that they can't handle some unruly parents yelling at a school board meeting? The FBI has to be involved in that? Okay, fair enough. How far are we willing to take this game? I seem to recall a lot of people protesting and being angry at Trump and Trump supporters and people in Congress. Is the FBI getting involved anytime they show up and voice concern? Is the FBI going to show up anytime someone comes to an NRA gathering and yells? Is the FBI getting involved with that as well? I mean, surely the local police can't handle angry people voicing their opinions. You might say, but Rob, it's going further than that. Cool, show me the evidence. Merrick Garland was asked to present the evidence. What did he say? He said the National School Board Association letter, which has since been rescinded, and news articles. Which articles? You okay with that? Would you be okay with the Trump administration doing this? If Trump's reelected in 2024 and he brings Bill Barr back for some god-awful reason, and they say, boy, Rand Paul and, Matt Gaetz and a bunch of other Republicans, there's a lot of people saying some really heinous shit against them. People at the Women's March said bad things about them. So we're now going to send a memo out that says that the FBI is going to look in to working with local law enforcement to target groups that are too harsh against Matt Gaetz and against Donald Trump and against Rand Paul. Fair enough? I mean, fuck, Rand Paul actually had his ribs broke and was assaulted outside of a Trump rally a second time. So fair enough, the FBI is going to target those groups. And then you can't do that. Oh, no. We're not calling you terrorists. We're just working with local law enforcement to look into you. That's all. We okay with that? Why have a task force of prosecutors? Why have any FBI involvement whatsoever if we're just talking about unruly parents yelling? Even Merrick Garland admits that's not what we were going after. Cool. He crafted a policy. There had to be a reason for him to craft a policy. He keeps saying in these testimony, it's not just going after angry parents. They have the right to voice their concern at school board meetings. It's not the guy that did the Nazi salute. We're not going after him. Then who are you going after? Is this just preemptive? Well, we don't have evidence right now. We haven't compiled evidence, but theoretically, someone could enact violence against a school board member. Theoretically. It could become a problem, so we're going to preemptively get the FBI involved? Okay. Isn't it strange that they've only gone after their political opponents then? People that are at school boards upset about the direction of critical race theory, mass policies, and things like that. Weird. Why aren't they going to, Antifa events? They say that's just an idea. Why aren't they going to Black Lives Matter events? Why aren't they going to left-wing groups? We don't have evidence they've engaged in violence yet, but hypothetically they could. So that doesn't seem to make sense. So the only explanation is somewhere out there is data that prompted Merrick Garland to say there are a bunch of terroristic or threats of violence and things like that occurring at school board members that warranted the FBI getting involved. So where's that data, Merrick Garland? And the best he could provide you was National School Board Association letter, which, oh, by the way, I didn't even read the data in, and reports that I saw in the news. Which ones, Merrick Garland? This isn't me putting words in his mouth. This is this guy's own words. We're okay with the Attorney General weaponizing the FBI, getting the FBI involved, and going after whatever group they want if they heard a newspaper report saying that it was bad. Let me ask you this. What if he tunes into Hannity and Fox News and Breitbart and the Washington Examiner, and they all say, boy, there are a lot of groups that are facilitating illegal immigrants coming into the United States. And so then Merrick Garland puts a memo on and goes, I've read a lot of news articles that suggest a lot of pro-immigrant groups are facilitating illegals. So we're going to get the FBI to go to all these pro-immigrant groups. We're going to talk to local law enforcement where these pro-immigrant groups are occurring because we think that illegalities could be occurring. Would that be okay? Why are you doing that, sir? Well, I saw Hannity last night. Did you guys watch Tucker last night? That's why I did it. News articles, reports. It complied with reports. Seriously, Dwight Zombie, I don't care what Dylan said. Don't bring him up on my channel. I don't want to talk about him. What's it matter if Cruz reads everything his law clerks propose? That's not what he's suggesting. He's saying if he was going to make a decision to weaponize the FBI, he would look at the data before he did it.
Says the actions of the parents could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism.
And that is wrong.
And asks the president to use the Patriot Act in regards to domestic terrorism directed at parents. This was the basis of your memo.
My memo.
The Department of Justice, when you're directing the FBI to engage in law enforcement, you're not behaving as a political operative because a political ally of the president says, hey, go attack these parents because we don't like what they're saying. Department of Justice, you did no independent research on what was happening, did you?
The memo has nothing to do with partisan.
Did you do independent research?
The memo has.
Did you do independent research?
The memo has nothing to do.
Okay, you're
with
not answering that
politics.
question.
Now, if you heard what Garland was started to say when he was interrupting Cruz there, he said, and you'll notice that part of the memo, right, or that part of the letter. So this is what Merrick Garland's going to argue here, right? He's going to say this is the positions he's trying to juggle here at once, right? He's going to say they were wrong. He starts to say, you can hear it. Ted Cruz says, it says that they were domestic terrorists and you should use the Patriot Act. And Garland starts to say, and that was wrong. Okay, let's take Garland at face value. So there are two parts of the letter. The first part is the framing that the National School Board Association has and their recommendation. So they're saying, we're framing this as if these people are potential domestic terrorists and we should use the Patriot Act to go after them. That's part one of the letter. And the second part is, here's the actual stories that show increased violence against the school boards. Everyone agree with that? And Merrick Garland saying, no, that framing was wrong. The framing of the letter that talked about domestic terrorists and using the Patriot Act, that was wrong. That wasn't the part of the letter that I was using to craft my letter. Right? Everyone hear that? Then what part was Merrick Garland using? Because the other part, the actual story cited that the National School Board Association said was proving the violence, he admits he didn't read. So the first part of the letter, the National School Board, he's like, that part was wrong. The part was wrong that was saying that they're terrorists and that we should use the Patriot Act. That part was wrong. And the second part I didn't read. I didn't read the actual cases that they cited. I didn't read those. So then what was Merrick Garland saying when he said that this letter was the basis for why he crafted his memo? What part of the letter? He thinks the first part was wrong. He didn't say that, by the way. He didn't say that when Jim Jordan asked him. Jim Jordan said, what prompted you to craft this? Where was the data? He didn't say, well, the National School Board Association. Now, they were wrong to say that we should use the Patriot Act and domestic terrorists and all of that. But he didn't say that. He just said that letter. Now he starts off saying, well, I didn't read the second half of the letter. I didn't actually read the cases they listed. And I think the first part of the letter was wrong. Okay, then what part of the letter? There's two letters. There's the National School Board Association letter, which they had worked with the White House to craft, which said, we want the FBI to go after parents because they're they're like domestic terrorists, and maybe we should use the Patriot Act to go after them. So the National School Board Association puts this letter out September 29th on a Wednesday. The following Monday, Merrick Garland says, there's been a troubling increase in violence against school board members, and so we're going to have the FBI work in conjunction with local law enforcement. So there's the letter from the National School Board Association, and then there is the memo, which is the new policy set forth by the Attorney General saying, yes, we are going to send the FBI out to now look into parents. The reason he changed it, so it's not just a letter, and Ted Cruz points this out. This wasn't just an errant tweet that Merrick Garland said. This was a policy that he crafted, that the FBI was now getting involved in angry school board parents. They were going to work with local law enforcement to look into these angry parents. Why? Well, because of increased violence. And Merrick Garland's very specific to say, we're not talking about them just shouting at school board meetings. We're talking about violence. Okay, where's the evidence of the violence? Well, Merrick Garland says the National School Board Association letter. And so they say, oh, did you read all of the instances that they talked about? Because there's almost no violence there. He says, no, I didn't read it. Oh, so then you were just going off their word that they said that this was terrorism and that we should use the Patriot Act. No, that was wrong for them to say that. Then where is his justification for the FBI intervening? What happened was, and this is a win for people that pushed back on these schools, but this is a win for parents. Because what happened was, Merrick Garland never thought that the National School Board Association would be forced to back down. He didn't anticipate state after state after state saying, we no longer associate with the National School Board Association. And so then the NSBA was like, oh shit, we've gone too far. We called concerned parents domestic terrorists. We said that we should use the Patriot Act against them. By the way, they meant every word of that shit. And then when this story came out of Loudoun, that one of the two stories they cited of an arrest as proof of potential domestic terrorism was a man who was furious that a school board covered up the rape of his daughter. Once that story came out, whoops, National School Board wasn't looking too hot. So they had to rescind the letter and apologize. Now Merrick Garland's holding the bag. Now, the National School Board Association and the Democrats in the Biden administration, they still want to go after angry parents because indoctrinating children is one of the biggest tools they have. So they want to weaponize the FBI to go after these parents. They absolutely do. So they're not going to say, okay, we're not going to do that now. So they're just saying, fuck you. We don't have to give you a reason. We said the letter and we don't give a fuck. That's it. That's literally what's happening here. And the left doesn't give a shit. The same left that was worried, Donald Trump will weaponize his DOJ. He'll weaponize him. He'll weaponize the FBI to go after political opponents. Now when it's literally happening in front of my eyes, not a peep from them.
Testified you know nothing about the violent sexual assault that happened in Loudoun County, even though it's one of the bases in this letter.
I read about it since then.
Okay. You told the House last week you knew nothing about it.
Not know at the time, no.
Okay. This week, the court concluded that a 14-year-old girl was violently raped by a boy wearing a skirt in the girls' restroom. The school district covered it up, released the boy, sent him to another school where he violently raped another girl. The father, who Mr. Hawley just showed you, was the father of the first girl. He was understandably... Do you understand why A parent would be upset when your daughter is raped at school, the school board covers it up, and then lies to you and claims there have been no assaults, we have no instances of assaults in our bathroom, and that was a flat-out lie, as the court concluded this week. Do you understand why the parent would be upset?
Absolutely, and any expressions of upset are completely protected by the First Amendment.
Except you just called him a domestic terrorist.
I never called him that. That's not correct.
This letter calls him a domestic terrorist. You based a direction to the FBI, an official direction from the Attorney General, on this letter. And I'll tell you what, the NSBA is so embarrassed of this letter, they've apologized for it and retracted it, but you don't apparently have the same willingness to apologize and retract what you did. Let me ask you something else. A big part of this letter is that they're upset about parents not wanting critical race theory taught. Your son-in-law makes a very substantial sum of money from a company involved in the teaching of critical race theory. Did you seek and receive a decision from an ethics advisor at the Department?
By the way, Key Lime saying that the parent screwed up by going on Fox. He probably ruined both cases. Perhaps. I don't know anything about that. I didn't see anything about that. But it's telling. It's not that the school board fucked up by covering up the rapes. It's the angry father fucked up. What would you do, Key Lime, if it was your daughter and the school board covered it up? I wonder. But interesting. That's the problem. The problem's the angry dad. He fucked up. Good call, Key Lime.
Of Justice before you carried out an action that would have a predictable financial benefit to your son-in-law.
This memorandum is aimed at violence and threats of
I just
violence.
asked a question. Did you seek an ethics?
It has no predictable
Did you
effect
seek
on-
an ethics opinion?
It has no...
He says it's aimed at violence and threats of violence. Where did he demonstrate any evidence of violence or threats of violence? Did he cite one case, even one? The only things he cited was the National School Board Association letter, which has since been rescinded. He admitted he didn't read any specific cases in there that were violence or threats or violence. And then he said news articles, but he didn't cite anyone specifically. Now, notice how what Ted Cruz is saying is, your son-in-law sells critical race theory materials. Did you consult with any ethics commission as to whether or not your decision that would predictably lead to more critical race theory in schools by going after parents that were complaining about it, did you consult any ethics committee? And he won't answer it, and that's the rest of this.
Did you seek an ethics opinion? Judge, you know how to ask questions and answer them. Did you seek an ethics opinion?
You asked me whether I sought an ethics opinion about something that would have a predictable effect on something. This has no predictable effect in the way.
According to him. So imagine if that was the case, if that's how we did with ethics, right? I didn't see the conflict of interest, says Donald Trump. Like, imagine that. Did you seek an ethics opinion on whether or not you giving, subsidies to a country where you have businesses in, did you seek an ethics committee? No, because I knew there was no conflict of interest. Well, a bunch of other people think that there is a potential conflict. And that's the point, right? When we're talking about ethics, right? You could see this all throughout the Mueller report, too. It's not just preventing a conflict of interest, it's preventing the appearance of a conflict of interest. That's why you're supposed to go to an independent ethics arbiter. That's what it's about. Not just to prevent conflict of interest, but the appearance of conflict of interest. And so and a reasonable person could say, I'm not saying that it's a definite conflict of interest for Merrick Garland's son-in-law to be selling critical race theories while he's weaponizing the FBI to go after parents that are critical of critical race theory, but it could have the appearance of it. And Merrick Garland's like, no, I don't have to consult an ethics committee because I know that there is no conflict of interest. That's not how it works.
Way that you're talking about.
So if critical race theory is taught in more schools, does your son-in-law make more money?
This memo has nothing.
If critical race theory is taught in more schools, does your son-in-law make more money? Yes or no?
This memorandum has nothing to do with critical race theory.
Will you answer
or
if you
any
sought an
other
ethics
kind
opinion?
of curriculum.
Will you answer if you sought an ethics
I am
opinion?
answering the best I can.
Yes, sir.
And he could say it has nothing to do with critical race theory, but he's already made the mistake of admitting that the precursor for him drafting this was the National School Board Association letter, which specifically cites parents angry as critical race theory and mask policies as the two reasons that parents are getting fired up. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, well, the reason that I crafted this memo and engaged in this policy was because of this National School Board Association letter, but it has nothing to do with critical race theory. That's not what the letter that you based it on said.
Or no, did you seek an ethics opinion?
This memorandum has nothing...
Did you seek an ethics opinion?
This memorandum has nothing to do with...
General, are you refusing to answer if you sought an ethics opinion?
I'm telling you that there's no possible...
So you're saying no. Just answer it directly. You know how to answer a question directly. Did you seek an ethics opinion?
I'm telling you that if I thought there was any reason to believe there was a conflict of interest, I would do that. But I cannot...
Why do you refuse to answer the question? Why won't you just say no?
I'm sorry.
You're not going to answer the question?
I'm sorry. Ask the question again.
Did you seek an ethics opinion?
I'm saying again, I would seek an ethics opinion in...
So no is the answer, correct?
There was a
Senator, your time is up.
Let the record reflect the Attorney General refuses to answer whether he sought an ethics opinion, and apparently ethics are not a terribly high priority in the Biden Justice Department.
I don't think that's a fair reflection of what I said.
Then answer the question.
Senator, you've gone way beyond any other senator's time. I think you ought to be at least respectful of other senators at this point.
Mr. Chairman, do you know the answer whether he sought an ethics opinion?
I think you have exchanged that so many times, we know where we stand.
The best part of that little exchange at the end there was like, oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? All he had to do was say, no, I didn't seek an ethics opinion because it was no conflict of interest. That's what he's saying without saying it. But he's just being intentionally obfuscating is what he's doing. That's it. Now, let's check some more stuff out. Here's a little exchange from Josh Hawley. Oh, here's Mike Lee, right?
Well, and one of the things that concerns me is...
Mike Lee is going to ask him, where is the evidence you saw that prompted you to have this policy to get the FBI involved? That's Mike Lee's line of question.
We've got 17 attorneys general, led by Attorney General Todd Rokita in Nevada and joined by a total of 17 attorneys general, including Sean Reyes, the fantastic attorney general of the state of Utah. And they've weighed in and they've said that there is not a barrage of accusations. There's no unusual flood of accusations of threats of violence against school board members. Nothing unusual, nothing that they can't handle at the state and local level. Normally, things like this against state and local officials involving state and local government entities like school boards are not federal. Now, in response to a series of questions before the House Judiciary Committee, including some questions asked by Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio, you were asked your factual predicate for your October 4th memorandum and for your conclusions in this regard. You answered before that committee that your factual predicate for that was the October 22nd memorandum from the National School Board Association. The National School Board Association has been mentioned, has since withdrawn that memo, and yet you said that was the factual predicate. Given that that was the factual predicate and that it's rescinded its memo saying that there was no justification for some of the language that they used in that letter, will you rescind your memo?
Senator, best of my recollection, I said that the impetus for the letter, for my memorandum, was that letter and also reports of this kind of activity.
What reports?
I said again that at the time that they were news reports that had been published, and I think that some of the other senators here have described some of those news reports, and we've certainly seen subsequently more news reports and more statements by board members of threats to kill them.
Congressman Chip Roy of Texas said, raised in that same hearing the issue of a 14-year-old girl.
Right? News reports. Now, I brought this up, and I mentioned this previously, but it was something that I talked about during the Russia collusion, the Mueller investigation, and all this stuff. We found out that the FBI, when they sought to get a FISA warrant on Carter Page, a member of Trump's team, which would allow them through the two-hop rule to get communications all throughout Trump's team, even when he was president, that they cited Christopher Steele's dossier, but they also cited Michael Isikoff. Am I getting that name right? I think it's Michael Isikoff. Michael Isikoff from Yahoo News. So they said, we didn't confirm Christopher Steele's reporting, but Yahoo News did. Well, it later turned out that the source for Isakov was Christopher Steele. So Christopher Steele was the source for the news that confirmed Christopher Steele was telling the truth. That's circular. That'd be like if I say, trust me, I saw Biden kick a baby. And then Tucker Carlson goes, we could report today that we've independently confirmed Rob Knorr's statements that he saw Biden kick a baby. And then when pressed, Tucker's like, well, our source was Rob Knorr. Well, then no one's confirmed what I said. It's just me telling someone else. Yeah, I'm telling the truth. But aside from that, are we really comfortable with our law enforcement agencies using the mainstream media as the reason to go after people? So it's not that the FBI did their own research in the case of Christopher Steele. It's, well, Yahoo News told us it was cool. It's not that Merrick Garland and the DOJ did their own research here. It's, well, we heard news reports say it was true. Maybe the news reports were false. Can anyone think of an instance, I don't know, recently where news reports have turned out to be false? Yeah, I called him Jason the other day. That's what it was, yeah. Yeah, why even have an FBI? Why don't we just consult CNN and the New York Times and Washington Post and say, hey, tell us what's a problem today, and we'll just do whatever you guys want. That's the role? That's what the Attorney General's doing? Well, my factual predicate was news articles I saw. Did they talk to the people that were mentioned in the news articles? If the news article said Scott Smith was arrested for violent threats at the school board, did they contact Scott Smith? The Department of Justice, did they contact the school board? Because it turns out that example from that news story turned out to be, whoops, there was no threat of violence. It was the school board covering up the rape of Scott Smith's daughter. So how many of those other stories are accurate? We don't know. But the FBI, the Department of Justice is weaponizing the FBI based on those reports? Again, are we okay if conservative news outlets start reporting something and a conservative Department of Justice says, we're using Fox News as the rationale for why we're enacting these policies? Is that going to be okay? Where's your rationale for why you have the FBI looking into these people? Well, Fox News reports. That's our rationale. Breitbart reports. New York Post reports. Washington Examiner reports. The Daily Mail. That's our rationale. Project Veritas. That's our rationale. These are the rules, right? We could do this, right? Everyone's okay with this. By the way, hear anyone on the left, anyone today have a problem with what Merrick Garland was saying? Jake Tapper on it? Anderson Cooper? Any of your favorite left-wing streamers? They calling out how ridiculous this is? The same ones that told you how Trump was an authoritarian and a fascist, and he was going to weaponize his agencies to go after his political opponents. Any of them speaking up today? Now, let's get to Josh Hawley. We only need the end of this one. Josh Hawley says this with more tact than I would have, but he's absolutely right, and I'm glad someone's finally showing a little bit of fire. Here's what Hawley says.
This is shameful. This testimony, your directive, your performance is shameful.
Okay. That's not
Thank God you are not on the Supreme Court. You should resign in disgrace, Judge. This is shameful.
Look how meek he looks. He should resign. It's absolutely despicable. Good on Josh Hawley for calling that out. Absolutely. And Merrick Garland. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't play some of the Democrats that are defending Garland. And I've heard, and I actually think this is true, Dick Durbin tried to defend him by saying, well, I've seen newspaper reports that suggest that. That's not much of a defense. Cory Booker steps up to the plate, though. Spartacus is there for you. And remember, as Cory Booker's want to tell you, it's not the truth, it's his truth. Right? Just like he said in the Kavanaugh meetings. That's what's important. So let's look at what Cory Booker has to say, shall we? Coming to the defense of Merrick Garland.
The October 4th memo reads, in recent months, there's been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school administrators, board members,
that
teachers,
was Tom Cotton. I'm sorry.
and staff who participate in the vital work of running our nation's public schools. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
I mean, it is true.
It is true.
I have a list of very disturbing incidents in Texas.
Okay, so he says, your first line says there's been increased violence, intimidation, harassment against school board members. Is that true? Garland says, yes, that's true. Okay, where was your evidence for that when you crafted? We've asked you several times, and he said the National School Board Association memo and news reports, but he hasn't cited any specific news reports. So you heard Merrick Garland say earlier, as we've seen some of the Democrats have showed these news reports, he's talking about Cory Booker here. So let's see the reports that Booker cites.
A parent physically assaulted a teacher.
Oh, sorry, let's go back.
I have a list of very disturbing incidents. In Texas, a parent physically assaulted a teacher. August 18th, 2020.
Okay. That's bad. I don't know what the nature of that physical assault was. I'm against all forms of political violence. If someone committed an assault on a teacher, that's bad. Was it at a school board meeting? Was it in the context of protesting things that were being taught? I don't know. But let's assume that it was, that's what happened. That's one incident. Is anyone out there going to argue that one incident requires the FBI involvement? Was that person, it says that person was arrested, so surely it looks like local law enforcement was capable of dealing with it. So why is the FBI not involved? But let's keep going.
21 in Pennsylvania, a person posted threats in social media which required police to station outside of a school district. Law enforcement investigating the person. I could keep going.
Threats. Okay. I've received threats. Nick Sandman received threats. Almost anyone on a public sphere receives threats. Is the FBI getting involved every time? I'm not for threats, but that's fine. Everyone has a story of receiving threats. Does the FBI get involved? So we have two cases. One where someone was arrested. Another, there were threats. Okay.
Ohio, a school board member was threatening a letter that began with, "We are coming from you." Domestic terrorism in the United
In Ohio, a school board member got a letter that said, "We are coming for you." Are you shitting me? That doesn't mean violence necessarily. Again, we just talked about in the debate last night, Maxine Waters publicly said to chase Republicans and Trump cabinet members out of public spaces, harass them, push them out. Where was Cory Booker? Was the FBI involved? Did the FBI get involved with Maxine Waters' statement? For example, I could say this: we're coming for you because of your terrible treatment. You will never be reelected to a public office in this area again. We're coming for you could mean we're coming for your job. We're coming to chase you out of your office, to get someone to replace you, to report on the terrible things you've done. So he cites three examples. Three examples he cites, right? That's it. Now, there's no proof that these three examples that are the ones that Merrick Garland was reading. Merrick Garland's still yet to give an example. He didn't say, yeah, those were the ones I was reading. Didn't say that. No, I don't know that I said James's "your next tweet is threatening." I didn't think "your next" meant that they were going to physically attack the cop that shot that girl. I thought it meant that they're going to ruin his life. I didn't take that as a threat of an assault. I thought he was saying, look at what happened to Derek Chauvin. You're next because we're going to get you arrested, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I took it. I don't think I ever said that was LeBron threatening physical harm. Yeah, I took it to mean like cancel culture, which doesn't require FBI involvement. I challenge you to find an example of me saying, oh boy, the FBI needs to get involved in LeBron James here because he tweeted that out. So those are the three examples. Based on those three examples, that's the defense right there. So in this entire meeting, these are the three examples that warrants the FBI getting involved. 3 newspaper articles, one which was someone was arrested, one which was someone said of threat. We don't know what the nature of the threat was. And the other was someone said, you're next. That's it. That's the basis for FBI targeting parents. Now Cory Booker's going to go on to talk about domestic terrorism. Now this is totally separate from the idea of angry parents at school boards, which is what the FBI or what the memo was from Merrick Garland. But listen to how he cleverly switched tacks here, right? So listen to what he says.
The United States, sir, Has it been more from overseas? We are coming from you. Domestic terrorism in the United States, sir, has it been more from overseas radical terrorists since 9/11 or more from homegrown terrorists?
Listen to that question. Domestic terrorism in the United States, has it been more overseas or homegrown? Hey, dumb shit. The definition of domestic terrorism would mean it's more at home. Idiot. What are you talking about? Is there Islamic terrorism? Is there more Islamic terrorism from people that are Muslims or people that are Amish? It's the Muslims, right? Yes. It's troubling to see how many people in the religion of Islam, vast preponderance of Islamic terrorism occurs by people that are followers of the religion of Islam. It's very troubling. That's troubling. More domestic terrorists are from at home than overseas. Very troubling. Good work, Cory Booker.
Most of them being right-wing extremists, which has been...
Now, by the way, in case you question whether or not this was political, what does that matter? Let's say that he's right, that domestic terrorism is majoritarily right-wing extremists. What does that have any relevance to this? Merrick Garland's saying this isn't political, right? It's not political. He's not saying, oh, the FBI is going after parents of a certain political belief. He's saying the FBI is going after angry parents. Merrick Garland's pretending, oh, that's not political. It's not political at all. But somehow Cory Booker implicitly knows to say right-wing. Why do you think that is? Well, because everybody knows that it's political, including Cory Booker. He just gives the game away.
Greater since 9/11.
I want to be careful about that. The threats that we face with respect to terrorism, and none of those descriptions have to do with terrorism, but the threats that we face in the United States come both.
Now, Merrick Garland, at least honest there, he says the three examples you gave, those descriptions, none of that has anything to do with terrorism. So what's Cory Booker doing here? He says there was a guy that punched a teacher, there was a guy that threatened a teacher, and there was a guy that said, we're coming for you, to a school board member. And there's domestic terrorism. And Merrick Garland's like, well, nothing you just cited were examples of terrorism.
From foreign terrorists.
A church in South Carolina, a synagogue in Pennsylvania, a school, Parkland, a school, Newtown. Has there been threats and violence against schools in the United States of America?
What does terrorist attacks at synagogues and shootings at school have to do with parents angry at school board meetings? What does one have to do with the other? Okay. Well, I can make the same argument. The Trump administration or DeSantis administration in 2024 says we're going to go after send the FBI to analyze Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and the Women's March. And when people say, how do you justify? Isn't it true that a synagogue's been shot up? Isn't it true that Steve Scalise has been shot? So therefore, you'd say, well, wait a minute. What the hell does one have to do with the other? Racist or students shooting up a school is not the same as angry parents at school board meetings. Completely different. And the synagogue, do I even have to mention why that's not the same thing? By the way, notice how when they define domestic, as I've done this many times, if you look at the definition of domestic terrorism, the definition is basically using violence or intimidation, non-state actors using violence or intimidation to achieve political goals. Well, we've seen that over and over from Black Lives Matter and Antifa, but we don't consider those terrorist incidents. Why is that? If you firebomb a police station or a guard station outside the White House, that's not considered domestic terrorism. Why is that? Sure, if you say the definition is, oh, by the way, we don't consider left-wing examples of using violence, harassment, or intimidation to achieve political goals. We don't consider that domestic terrorism. And look, there's more right-wing domestic terrorism. Sure, because you define, it's the same way people do with racism. Well, there's more racism. Racism is, you can't be racist. Racism is prejudice plus power. Therefore, black people can't be racist. Oh, and now that I define it like that, look, no black people are racist. Great, because you defined it that way. So anyways, let's finish this out.
There have been, yes.
Coming from what types of groups?
Well, they come from domestic groups.
From domestic groups.
Yes.
Has there been a long, pages-long list of what my staff could grab, been threats and violence against school officials in the United States of America in the last year?
I obviously haven't seen the list, but it...
Let me replay that for you. Ready? Let's hear this like 10 times. Did you hear what was just said? Now, I just want to be clear. The people on the left and people defending Merrick Garland are saying, oh, the Cory Booker segment, that was the good segment. That's where they really defended Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland says the FBI needs to get involved in going after angry parents. Where is the data that proves that that's necessary? Well, the National School Board Association letter and newspaper articles that I've seen. And Cory Booker goes, we have a list. We have a list of threats being issued to school board members, pages long. And Merrick Garland says, oh, I haven't seen that. You can't make this shit up. How is that a defense of Merrick Garland then? Let's play it again. Listen to this.
And violence against school officials in the United States of America in the last year.
I obviously haven't seen the list, but it accords with my recollections.
Well, let me accord your recollection with the letter that I staff could grab. Been threats and violence against school officials in the United States of America in the last year.
I obviously haven't seen the list, but it accords with my recollections.
Well, let me accord your recollection with...
I haven't seen that list, but it makes sense from the news articles I think I heard, which I couldn't cite. Are you fucking kidding me? How does anyone find that acceptable? So now the argument is, well, if we just willy-nilly say you could use the FBI for whatever purpose you want. Go out and investigate anything you want. And then hopefully some senator later says, yeah, I saw a report that said that was a good idea. I saw a list that said that was a good idea. And you're like, oh, fuck it, I didn't see that list. But yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Yeah, list? Yeah, fuck it, sounds good. List? Sure, there's a list. I didn't read no list, but yeah, fuck it. Trailhead says some uneducated guy is rambling. His name's Cory Booker. I'm commenting on it.
The letter that I've heard so much about that I pulled it to read it. You say literally, spirited debate about policy matters is protected under the Constitution. I'm quoting one of my colleagues today. Does that sound like harassing and intimidating moms and dads? You affirm at the top of your letter that spirited debate is allowed.
Yeah, that's what the top of the letter says. But when asked, okay, give the examples then of the things that went beyond that you're justifying the FBI getting involved, he can't give any examples. He just says, oh, news stories in the National School Board Association letter. The National School Board Association letter said, we're going to treat parents like domestic terrorists and go after them with the Patriot Act. And when asked the specific example, you could say, well, they just meant the violent ones. That's what they meant. They weren't saying go after, Rob goes to the school board meeting and goes, I'm upset about critical race theory. They're not saying treat me like a domestic terrorist and go with the Patriot Act after me. They're just talking about the violent ones. Only problem is they cite 15 examples which aren't violence, including Scott Smith, a parent in Loudoun County whose daughter was raped and the school board covered up for it. I do remember when Cory Booker wasn't terrible. Wife, how you doing? So the best that could be mustered is Cory Booker gives 3 examples, none of which seem that impressive, and then asserts he holds a stack of papers and say, I got a list. What does he claim the list says? School board members that say they've got threats. Okay. That's it? That's the FBI involvement? Does that prove that those threats happened? What are the nature of the threats? Are the threats, we're going to let everyone know what you've defended? We're going to tell people not to shop at your store? Are those the nature of the threat? Those are threats. They're not threats of physical violence. They're protected threats. Are they threatening to come for their positions?